Mark Carney back at the White House for the second time in 5 months, making another pitch to Donald Trump to drop his tariffs against Canada. But so far, Carney hasn't reached any deal to bring relief to sectors hit hard by tariffs, like steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber.
Mark Carney's second visit to the White House was supposed to bring relief. Instead, it brought another reality check. The cameras captured the handshake, the smiles, the flags, but behind that choreography was silence on substance. No deal, no roadmap, no relief. Just more tariffs, more pain, and a government running out of excuses. For weeks, Ottawa told Canadians to manage expectations. That line now sounds prophetic, because expectations have fallen to zero. Trump spoke for half an hour, praising Carney as a strong leader, even calling him extremely popular. But when the microphones turned off, the verdict was clear. Canada got nothing. 2 visits in 3 months, 2 polite press moments, 0 results. While Carney smiled for the cameras, Washington quietly added another blow. New tariffs on medium and heavy-duty trucks, on top of existing levies for steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, and pharmaceuticals. Trump owned the stage. He joked about annexing Canada, mocked the idea of competition, and said exactly what every Canadian manufacturer feared. We want to make cars. They want to make cars. We're in competition. That's not diplomacy, that's dominance. While Carney talked about partnership and investment, Trump talked about control. He reminded the world that the U.S. used tariffs to make the U.K. and Japan pour hundreds of billions of dollars into American factories. Then, with a grin, he hinted Canada might soon follow that playbook. Carney tried to steer the conversation toward cooperation, touting Canada's $500 billion investment in the U.S. and promising another trillion more if a deal came through. Within hours, his office had to correct the number, another unforced error that made Ottawa look sloppy and desperate. The reality couldn't be clearer. Trump negotiates from strength. Carney negotiates from hope, and every round of dialogue just tightens America's grip.
The Prime Minister's office was managing expectations for today's meeting with the U.S. President, and that may turn out to have been the right call, given the lack of obvious tangible results coming out of it.
Back in Canada, the consequences are everywhere. Steel mills in Hamilton are slowing down. Auto suppliers in Windsor are losing contracts. And in Atlantic Canada, families can't even afford the basics. A new Ipsos study shows half of Atlantic Canadians are less than $200 away from financial collapse. Grocery lists are shrinking. Heating bills are climbing. Even food banks are running out of donations. Carney's government calls it short-term turbulence, but for millions it feels permanent. The very policies meant to shield Canada from Trump's tariffs have only magnified the pain. Every promise of relief fades into another headline about rising costs, layoffs, and energy spikes. Canadians are watching their prime minister chase photo ops while they chase overdue bills. From the boardrooms of Toronto to the kitchens of Halifax, one feeling unites the country: frustration. The sense that Canada is playing by rules no one else follows, led by a government too slow to change course. Carney left Washington empty-handed. No tariff relief, no trade framework, no win to bring home. His staff called the meeting productive, but productivity means nothing when factories close and paychecks vanish. Trump returned to the Oval Office smiling. Carney returned to Ottawa explaining. And that's the difference between a negotiator and a spectator. Across the country, frustration is boiling over. People are asking how many more constructive meetings it will take before results appear. Because at this rate, Canada isn't negotiating from strength, it's negotiating for survival. If this is what success looks like under Mark Carney, then failure might be closer than anyone wants to admit. The next round of talks may decide not just tariffs or trade, but whether Canada can still call itself economically independent. And if nothing changes, Carney's legacy may be written in layoffs, inflation, and lost credibility.
Along with our NATO allies, we committed to NATO's new defense pledge of investing 5% of our annual GDP in the next decade.
Canada's government has unveiled a dramatic pledge to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP over the next decade. Ottawa presented it as a turning point, a chance to prove the country can defend itself without leaning on Washington. Yet the reality is very different. With Trump's tariffs already cutting deep into Canadian exports and a weakening job market, this promise adds a crushing burden to an already strained budget. Instead of boosting confidence, it risks inflating deficits and squeezing essential services like healthcare and education. What was meant to project strength instead highlights economic fragility. The timing makes matters worse. Canadians are already seeing higher prices, shrinking paychecks, and growing unemployment. Now they are being asked to shoulder unprecedented levels of defense spending. It is a gamble that looks less like strategy and more like desperation, especially when ordinary families feel the squeeze of trade wars and rising interest rates on mortgages. Ottawa points to submarines and autonomous aircraft as proof of progress. Submarines are branded as strategic assets, but they take weeks just to reach Arctic patrol areas and are limited by range and speed. Billions could vanish into hardware that adds little real security. This is the definition of backfire: huge costs with limited return. At the same time, projects in drone warfare and autonomous craft are paraded as innovation. Yet these programs are years away from meaningful deployment. They sound bold on paper, but for a country under immediate pressure from tariffs and economic slowdown, the benefits are far too distant. Shiny announcements may play well on television, but in practice, they drain resources that Canadians need today. And every dollar spent here is a dollar not spent on making Canadian industries competitive against Trump's tariff regime.
Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world. Canada has called us and they want to be a part of it, so we'll be talking to them. They want to have protection also.
Even with billions in new spending, Canada cannot break free from reliance on the United States. The militaries are deeply integrated through NORAD and NATO, sharing intelligence, training, and command structures. Any attempt at building parallel systems risks duplication, paying twice for capabilities that Washington already provides.
We seem to agree that our best defense against the United States in particular may very well be to just continue working with them.
This leaves Ottawa in a paradox. The more it spends, the more it exposes how little independence it actually has. The country ends up showcasing submarines and drones that still depend on American data, satellites, and support to function effectively. Rather than proving sovereignty, Canada demonstrates just how tied down it remains to its southern neighbor. And in that equation, Trump holds the advantage. Every escalation in tariffs or trade disputes now comes with the shadow of defense dependence hovering over Canada's side of the table. The Carney government wanted to show independence. Instead, it revealed a fragile fiscal position and a defense strategy riddled with contradictions. By chasing flashy projects and pledging vast sums of money, Canada highlights its weakness rather than its strength. For President Trump, the lesson is obvious. Canada talks about self-reliance but remains dependent and overextended. This imbalance gives Washington leverage in every negotiation. Trump can press harder on trade, knowing Ottawa has no real escape. Canadians are left with higher costs, rising debt, and the bitter realization that big spending has not made them safer or stronger. In trying to prove itself, Canada has managed to backfire, exposing its limits and reinforcing Trump's dominance in the process. And if Ottawa continues down this path, the worst may still be ahead. The more Carney insists Canada is ready to stand alone, the more he proves the opposite. For households already struggling, that contradiction will translate into fewer jobs, weaker public services, and rising frustration. In the end, Canada is paying more, getting less, and watching Trump tighten his grip on every negotiation that matters. And if Ottawa continues down this path, the worst may still be ahead. The more Carney insists Canada is ready to stand alone, the more he proves the opposite. For households already struggling, that contradiction will translate into fewer jobs, weaker public services, and rising frustration. In the end, Canada is paying more, getting less, and watching Trump tighten his grip on every negotiation that matters.
So far, we're really just starting to see the beginning of the impact of the global trade war.
Canada's unemployment rate rose to 6.9% in April, with the manufacturing sector alone shedding 31,000 jobs.
Well, we have worse news than expected for many economists today. 66,000 fewer jobs in the month of August.
The alarm bells are ringing across Canada. In August alone, Statistics Canada reported the country lost 66,000 jobs, pushing unemployment to 7.1%, the highest in years. These are not just numbers. They represent families in crisis, mortgages at risk, and savings evaporating. The losses hit hardest among workers aged 25 to 54, the very backbone of the workforce. For months, Prime Minister Mark Carney insisted his government had a plan to shield Canadians from Donald Trump's tariff storm. He promised stability. He promised protection. Instead, jobs are vanishing at a pace no one expected. Carney's assurances now look hollow, and his economic strategy stands exposed as little more than political theater. Behind the photo ops and staged speeches, Canadian workers see only pink slips and growing unemployment lines. Then came the hammer blow. Washington doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, effective immediately. Entire industries were thrown into chaos overnight. Canada's leaders responded with slogans about unity and strength, yet offered no effective counter. The reality is brutal. 23,000 steel jobs and 9,500 aluminum jobs are directly on the line, with ripple effects threatening 160,000 livelihoods. Communities from Sault Ste. Marie to Windsor brace for layoffs, while Ottawa clings to the language of resilience. Carney talks of a Team Canada approach, but the factories tell another story: stalled projects, shuttered production lines, and rising anxiety. Business leaders warn that counter tariffs could backfire. Unions plead for urgent support. Yet the government dithers, unable to deliver a coherent response. Trump pressed forward with decisive action, and Carney could only scramble in his shadow. For workers on the ground, the contrast is undeniable. One leader dictates the terms, the other delivers excuses. The pain does not stop there. Economists now warn that Canada could lose as many as 120,000 jobs by year's end as the global trade war deepens. Manufacturing has already shed 31,000 positions in April alone, and recession risks are climbing with each new report. Unlike after COVID, there will be no quick rebound. Growth is set for 3 consecutive quarters of contraction. While the United Kingdom managed to sign the first trade deal of Trump's second term, however fragile, Canada remains sidelined. Carney points to CUSMA as proof of stability, but that treaty is little comfort when Canadian families are staring down unemployment lines and dwindling paychecks. His speeches about a unified national economy ring hollow against the reality of closing factories and swelling food bank lines. Canadians wanted leadership. They got delay and deflection. And every new announcement from Ottawa sounds more like damage control than a plan, more like denial than real direction.
The verdict is clear. Mark Carney's policies have failed. He promised to shield Canadians from Trump's tariffs, but the country has instead walked straight into a storm of lost jobs and shrinking opportunity. Every month brings fresh evidence that Canada is losing ground, while Trump sets the terms of the trade war. Ordinary families pay the price through higher bills, uncertain futures, and communities hollowed out by layoffs. The so-called Team Canada response has been nothing more than a smokescreen for inaction. The longer Carney hesitates, the more painful the fallout will be. And unless Ottawa finds real answers soon, Canadians must prepare for an even harsher truth. The worst may still lie ahead. Canada is not only losing jobs, but also losing confidence, a far deeper wound that no short-term subsidy can heal.
We're starting to see the impact of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs as they begin to hit the Canadian economy. The unemployment rate in August ticked up to 7.1%. That's the highest level in 4 years. The Canadian economy shrank by 1.6% in the second quarter of the year. And during that same period, Canada's productivity dropped by 1%, the biggest plunge in 3 years.
The warning signs are impossible to ignore. Trump's tariffs are hammering Canada, and the damage is spilling into every corner of the economy. In August, unemployment jumped to 7.1%, the highest in 4 years. The economy shrank by 1.6% in the second quarter, while productivity suffered its steepest fall in 3 years. For ordinary Canadians, these are not abstract numbers. They mean lost jobs, vanishing savings, and mortgage payments slipping out of reach. Families look to Ottawa for leadership, but instead they see Mark Carney promising stability while delivering chaos. What was supposed to be a plan to shield Canada from American pressure is already collapsing under its own weight. At the heart of the crisis lies Carney's budget gamble. He has tried to sell Canadians on a vision of austerity and investment at the same time, as if the government can cut deeply while spending freely. The contradictions are glaring. Ottawa talks about trimming day-to-day operations, yet still fuels massive new projects that push the deficit toward $100 billion. The problem is not just the size of the shortfall, but the mixed message it sends. Businesses see a government chasing slogans rather than strategy, pledging discipline one moment and opening the taps the next. Private capital is retreating, down 10% in the second quarter, just as the economy needs it most. Even the prospect of lower interest rates from the Bank of Canada cannot restore confidence when fiscal policy looks so unstable. Credit agencies are already warning about Canada's debt trajectory, raising the risk of a downgrade that would make borrowing costlier for everyone. What was meant to project confidence now looks like weakness, and markets are responding accordingly. Now the human cost is mounting. More than 1.5 million Canadians are out of work. The employment insurance program, which should act as a safety net, covers barely a third of the unemployed, the lowest rate since 1941. That failure leaves workers completely exposed. Prime-age employees in once secure industries earning six-figure salaries are suddenly watching their homes slip away. In retail and hospitality, low-wage staff face eviction because 55% of minimum wage is not enough to survive. The pain is spreading far beyond those sectors. Auto plants in Ontario are scaling back shifts, steel mills are idling furnaces, and construction projects are stalling as material costs climb under Trump's tariff wall. Every lost paycheck means another family slipping into uncertainty, and every layoff adds pressure to already stretched food banks and rental markets. Carney's government promised resilience, but the cracks in the social fabric are widening. By failing to strengthen EI, by refusing to prepare for a recession, Ottawa has allowed this crisis to snowball. Instead of cushioning the blow, Carney's policies are amplifying it, turning what could have been a slowdown into a spiral of insecurity. Through it all, Canada's dependence on the United States has only grown clearer. The only lifeline left is CUSMA, keeping trade channels open and investment flowing. But even that is fragile, hanging on the goodwill of a president who has shown no hesitation to rewrite the rules. Trump can reopen the deal at any time, and Carney has no strategy to prevent it. Investors know it. That is why private capital is fleeing, leaving Canada with fewer options and less leverage. The reality is stark. Carney is not guiding Canada through the storm. He is being tossed around by it. Trump dictates the terms, and Ottawa scrambles after every move. Canadians pay the price, with higher unemployment, weaker growth, and a future clouded by doubt. And unless something changes, the worst may still be ahead.
I'm announcing today that the Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under goodwill.
Where are Mark Carney's elbows these days? He seems to have misplaced them. Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMA goods to 35% on August 1st, and Ottawa blinked. Instead of striking back, Mark Carney announced a tariff reset, removing most Canadian counter tariffs while leaving only steel, aluminum, and autos covered. Government aides describe it as strategic patience, but to Canadian families it looks like weakness. Prices are climbing, industries are strained, and Trump shows no sign of backing off. Carney talks about many cards in Canada's hand, yet the first one he played was surrender. The signal to Washington is obvious. Canada is willing to take punches without striking back. For Trump, that is victory before the next round even begins. Unable to win relief in Washington, Carney turned to Europe. On his tour of Germany, Poland, and Latvia, he promised deeper partnerships on energy, minerals, and defense. He pitched Canadian critical minerals and natural gas to German CEOs, hoping to diversify exports. But Europe itself remains trapped under Trump's tariff regime. Brussels and Berlin signed a 15% tariff cap, but only after pledging massive investments in U.S. projects. Switzerland refused, walked away empty-handed, and now faces nearly 40% tariffs. These outcomes show what happens when you negotiate from weakness. If Europe's economic giants cannot escape Trump's leverage, what chance does Canada have? Carney's European tour may produce headlines, but it will not lower the cost of a pickup truck in Ontario, or keep a single smelter in Quebec running at full capacity. Nor will it save prairie farmers from new U.S. tariffs on lumber and grain. Instead, it sends Trump a message that Ottawa is looking for distractions abroad rather than confronting the problem directly.
So what cards does Canada have left in these negotiations?
Canada has a lot of cards, Karina. We're their most important customer in critical industries.
Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc insists Canada still has lots of cards. He points to integrated supply chains, energy exports, and the promise of a CUSMA review in 2026. Yet Canadians feel the pain today. Auto plants in Ontario warn that higher steel and aluminum costs are squeezing margins and could trigger layoffs. Aluminum producers in Quebec have slowed production as U.S. buyers hesitate under uncertainty. Farmers in the prairies, already under strain from China's canola duties, now face pressure from U.S. tariffs on lumber and grain exports. The softwood lumber sector, always a flashpoint in Canada-U.S. trade, is once again under heavy strain, with mills warning about reduced shifts and threatened contracts. For workers, this means more insecurity and fewer hours on the job. LeBlanc's argument that Canada has leverage rings hollow when Ottawa has just removed counter tariffs on a wide range of U.S. goods. Those tariffs, introduced in February, were touted as Canada's defense. By lifting them, Ottawa gave up bargaining chips without securing relief. The reset was supposed to look smart, but instead it left Trump's tariffs untouched, while Canada's tools vanished. The comparison is stark. Mexico at least won a 90-day delay before new tariffs take effect. Japan and South Korea pushed Trump to cut auto tariffs nearly in half. Even the European Union secured a cap, though with strings attached. Canada alone stands without exemptions, without relief, and without a timeline for change. That is not leverage, it is exposure.
Mark Carney, while he made grand promises of change, he's even worse than Justin Trudeau.
What was supposed to be a standoff is turning into a one-sided fight. Trump sets deadlines, raises tariffs, and dictates the rules. Carney removes tariffs, pleads for talks, and looks abroad for cover. The outcome is obvious. Trump holds the upper hand, while Carney's strategy collapses under scrutiny. For Canadians, the consequences are immediate: higher prices, weaker industries, and jobs at risk. For Trump, it is proof that tariffs work as leverage, and for Carney, it is a political storm only beginning. Ottawa may speak of leverage, but on the ground, it is Canadian workers and consumers paying the price. If this is just the opening round, the blows still to come could be far more punishing.